Hello, everybody. It's 2 o'clock. Welcome to the final IECC DGC committee hearing. We still have quite a few people that we're waiting on joining, but there are some housekeeping items that we'll take care of in the meantime. We ask that you please keep your camera on during the whole committee hearing, unless you have to attend to something. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking. We will have a timer on the screen for portions of the hearing that needs that, and we will be following Robert's Rules of Order. For those of you who aren't familiar with that, the proposal will be introduced by the moderator, which is myself. We will then ask the proponent to give us a summary of that proposal. We will then ask the general public if anybody wants to speak in support of that proposal. Each person will have 2 minutes to speak in support. After all those are done, we will ask the general public if anybody wants to speak in opposition of that proposal. They will also have 2 minutes each. From there, we go to the committee to ask questions of the proposal. From there, we go back to the general public for any rebuttals and support. Rebuttals will have 1 minute each, and then rebuttals in opposition. Those will have 1 minute each. From there, we go back to the committee for discussions and motions. You can see on the screen, we have the agenda up. We will have 1 residential and 1 commercial. For all of those that are familiar with Zoom, there is a raise your hand function. We ask that you go ahead and try that function out right now, whether you're on the committee or part of the general public, because that's how we communicate with each other and know if you have something to say. So why don't you go ahead and do that. General public and committee members, please raise your hand via the Zoom function. And then we will get started. I see, good. Now I'm seeing some people in the public doing it. Sweet. Okay, you can go ahead and lower your hands. And we will get started. First item of business is item number 67. And don't know who is going to, Courtney, are you going to introduce that? Or Katrina, are you going to give us an update?
I can start just very briefly. So I'll just, to center our conversation today, remind you all who was in our residential working group very briefly. So I'll just share the list because we might have a slightly different mix of people here today than last time. So here is the list of who was in the residential working group. And while you're looking at that, I'll just remind you that the proposal today requires 10% renewables on homes, with exceptions for all electric buildings that achieve additional points from R408, or buildings that meet additional energy modeling points, or any homes smaller than 1,000 square feet. So that's the high level summary. This proposal that you're hearing today, of course, layers on top of all of the residential paths. So I mentioned last time that this is the proposal where we really sort of calibrate how much we want to do on a residential code, this code cycle, because it layers on top of the prescriptive path, the ERI path, and the 405 modeling path. So with that, I'll have Courtney walk through the proposal itself. Sean Dennison wasn't able to join us today, but was involved in developing the proposals, but he's out due to a family emergency.
Thank you, Katrina. And Kevin, I see your screen sharing. Thank you. So I'd start to dig into this proposal. As Katrina mentioned, we had the working groups, and the working groups were generally supportive of a minimum renewable requirement, but were concerned about the level required. The proposal was revised to require 10% on-site renewables from 20 to account for those homes that could not achieve renewables due to site constraints and that did not go all electric, and therefore would need to do increased efficiency in the exceptions. The group felt that the efficiency equivalency to 20% would be too challenging to achieve, but that the efficiency equivalent to 10% was ambitious but workable. This proposal does still have several exceptions to the renewable requirement. There is the added definition for all electric that aligns with the commercial definition. We've seen this definition several times in the last few committee hearings. We also have added a little bit of clarity to the renewable requirement, adding a language per square foot of conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit. And the minimum renewable requirement is that new dwelling units would be required to have on-site renewable energy system capable of producing an annual renewable energy of no less than 2.4 Kbtu per year per square foot of conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit. And it's important to note that this system is output, not system capacity. So the code does not really care about the size of the system, but only its renewable energy output. And that can vary based on the system design and the site conditions. The designers will need to calculate the output of their renewable energy system. The working group's general consensus from the original proposal was that doing 2 exceptions out of the 3 wasn't workable. So project now would just need to meet 1 exception. And this does incentivize all electric by allowing it as one of the first exceptions listed. There is also an exception for achieving additional R408 points. And this is the proposal that we all heard last hearing. From the original proposal, this version of the proposal reduces the amount of R408 points required in this exception. A mixed fuel building would need to do either renewables or achieve 27 points total from R408. So 9 from this proposal and then 18 from the R408 proposal we heard last time. This was reduced from the 35 points total that the original proposal had. There is an added equivalent exception to R408 in the energy modeling paths for ERI. A working group subgroup evaluated how the different compliance paths compared. And due to the differences in methodology of the ERI path, the subgroup felt that 5 ERI points was roughly equivalent to those 9 points in R408. There is an exception that allows a project to lower their R405 path by 9 percentage points. And the working group generally was agreeable that the offsite renewable energy is not an easy enough path to navigate for part of the code for residential buildings. So this was removed as an option that you might have remembered from the original proposal. And lastly, there is an added exception for units smaller than 1,000 square feet. And this 1,000 square footage aligns with the thresholds used for ADUs in Denver. So I'm going to pass it to Katrina, and she's going to walk us through some of the worksheet that you received from me on Friday, and see if we can use that as a tool in this hearing today. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Okay, I will just walk you all through that worksheet since I think in particular we don't have John Dutch and Bill Rictanis here. So let's see, I'm sharing the whole screen so that I can show you 2 different things. So first, we worked with, you can see this okay, is that right, Courtney and others? Great. So we worked with the 2 home builders on the committee. They were both part of the working group, John Dutch and Bill Rictanis. And we worked with them to look at what approach different homes might take to get through the prescriptive path in particular to help calibrate the proposal. So they also looked, and we did some exercises looking at what ERI would look like for these homes and what the 405 path looked like. So we asked them, this is the points table that you approved in the last meeting from R408. We asked them to say, what is the sort of easiest path through that the most people are likely to pick to get their 18 points if they're choosing the prescriptive path through R408. And so we color coded these where you have to pick among the options. So they said, 5% reduction in UA, ducts in conditioned space, gas space heating, high performance gas space heating, heat recovery ventilation, high performance gas water heating, lighting, and demand responsive thermostats was sort of the easiest path through, most likely path through. I will just note as like as a frame for you, the items that they felt were the hardest on the points table are the ones colored gray, because it's verified after the fact and these are more expensive. And so then we, had said how we got to the very end of our meeting. So some of what I want to make sure the committee understands is that I think this this proposal that's before you today of requiring 27 total credits for a property that doesn't want to do renewables isn't doing all electric. They're just choosing efficiency path. They'd have to get 18 plus 9 to 27, like Courtney was just saying. And we didn't spend a lot of time on this with the working group, but here is what they said. They'd add in high performance cooling, go to electric space heat, go to high performance heat recovery ventilation, and still do gas water heat. So I think the consensus was this is more than a lot of builders are doing today, but still pretty doable. And they started speculating, and we didn't really get to this because we ran out of time, about what would be what might come next if you were looking at what else was doable. And it was, we don't usually put appliances in homes today, but we could. They said that we could go to 10% UA, could go to electric water heat in addition to electric space heat. And that puts the total back at the 38, which was in the original proposal. And so this is a tool that if you all wanted to, play with this a little bit today, you could, because I will just reflect the working group didn't necessarily really robustly decide that this was all that could be done, but they felt pretty comfortable with this column. So you could also just take that when they get checked it, they felt pretty comfortable. The other thing I wanted to show was just a little progress update on how we're doing, because Sean isn't here to show this, but he shared the graphs with us. And so this chart you've seen through your committee hearings over time. It shows the residential proposals progress, accounting for what has passed already, as well as the proposal before you right now, number 67, as written for today's hearing. And so as always, you can see the Denver Energy Code 2022 of current status, and that is including the proposal before you right now. You'll notice that we're not on the net zero energy trajectory with all of the proposals you've passed, plus the one before you right now, but it is a significant step beyond the 2019 Denver Energy Code. And the reasons the dot is not on the max potential, these are notes from Sean, is that we're not voting on the residential electrification proposals that had been before you before. The ERI path became somewhat less stringent. R408 was scaled back in impact, and this minimum renewable proposal before you now was reduced from 20% to 10% renewables. So I hope that update on kind of the progress towards your goal is helpful also.
Okay, thank you both, Courtney and Katrina. I'm gonna share my screen again, just so it's up there. And so now that, just so you all know, what we'll do is we'll go to the general public for anybody that wants to speak in support or opposition. We'll come back for further questions from the committee. So at this time, we'll ask the general public, if anybody wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Maggie, you should be allowed to talk. Please introduce yourself and you'll have 2 minutes to speak.
Hi everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent. I just wanted to make sure I'm on a, I'm traveling, so I'm on a strange Wi-Fi. So thank you so much for the opportunity to speak today. I'm Maggie Thompson. and I work for Councilmember Clark. He's unable to be here today to speak to you directly because he's in a different working group, but he wanted me to come and give you some of his thoughts. So both City Council and the Mayor have made addressing climate change a top priority. In fact, climate change was one of the main remarks Mayor Hancock's State of the City addressed just last week. He ended his speech by saying, "It's not an exaggeration to say this is a race to save our future. It's a race we cannot afford to lose." The building code that you advance will ultimately come in front of Denver City Council for approval. We are firmly committed to living up to the call to action put forward by the Climate Action Task Force in 2020, and Council has led on these efforts with the creation of the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, and by unanimously approving the Energized Denver Ordinance for existing buildings. We know that in order to meet our city's climate goals, we need most new homes to be highly efficient, all electric with space heating and electric water heating. We cannot afford to adopt a code that needlessly locks in another decade or two of emissions from new gas systems that would make it hard, if not impossible, for homeowners to switch in the future. Please do not advance a code to City Council that allows the same exact systems in new homes that are prohibited in commercial buildings. It's fine to have options and exceptions, but the code should make all electric space and water heating the easy choice. Please amend the minimum renewables proposal today to have a stronger electrification component. Thank you so much for your time and energy on this super important process, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon.
Thank you, Maggie.
Yes, thank you, Maggie.
Next up is Johnny. Johnny, please introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Johnny Kutcher here with RMI. Not necessarily speaking for or against this proposal that is being shown on the screen here, but just echoing what Maggie said, we have some reservations about allowing for too much wiggle room for natural gas systems to still be installed in new buildings, and we would like to see this proposal strengthened a bit to reflect that. I think otherwise it's a good proposal, and I don't want to, oppose it, but I think that it could be stronger on electrification. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition? Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go back to the committee. Committee, anybody have questions about this proposal? Paul, go ahead.
So, a key question I had, and something I've been working on the last few days, as a matter of fact, is addressing some of the concerns that were just shared from comments from the public, is the potential to miss an opportunity here if we, as a committee, do not incorporate here, as homes would be required to have renewable energy put on them, to also require or strongly encourage electric, high efficiency electric heating and high efficiency electric water heating. I respect that the working group had worked to come up with this proposal, but I wasn't able to participate in that. And I think there was an opportunity missed along the line to take advantage of that. So I've actually drafted an amendment that at the right time I'd like to share my screen and share it with the committee, but I think there's a good opportunity here to make it where if a home were to do renewable energy on their home, and incorporate all electric space heating and high efficiency space heating and water heating, that they should be have a lower threshold for the amount of renewable energy that they have on their home versus someone who is continuing with kind of status quo construction, incorporating natural gas for space heating and water heating, that they would need to be required to have a higher level of renewable energy on their homes, because currently the way we have things in our code, we've taken advantage of doing this on the commercial side, but we're missing it on the residential side to say people, as we're building these new homes, encouraging and trying to move towards having, all electric space and water heating at the very least. I mean, it could still have a gas stove, they could still have a gas fireplace, but if we don't address some of these major consumers of natural gas in this part of the code, I feel like we've kicked the can down the road. So there's a lot of comment. And like I said, when the time is right, I'm happy to bring up my screen and share a proposed amendment, but I think some others had questions.
Okay, we have a subject matter expert, Robbie, has his hand up. Robbie, go ahead.
You're muted, Robbie.
Sorry, I'm muted there. Sorry. I said I don't disagree with what Paul was saying there, but I just wanted to point out that the first exception is for all electric properties. So the idea is that the objective is to do what Paul was just describing. It's just done in a slightly different way.
Okay, any other questions at this time? Paul, do you have a question or do you have a discussion?
A discussion item, so should I wait?
Yes, please wait. We'll have an opportunity for that.
Okay.
Any questions from the committee? Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question on the sizing requirement and how we review for that. You stated that the applicants would just indicate what the output was. How is it they calculate that? How do we verify their calculations? When I did kind of a Google search, it seemed like there were multiple different ways to calculate the output. So it seems like that might be concerning if they're calculating it in different ways. Some were pretty general, just kind of sunlight hours times area times like a loss factor of 0.75, and then others were so specific they were bringing into site-specific shading and then things of that nature.
I'll try and tackle that. This is Robbie with representing the Noresco team. If you look in the language of the section here, it says that renewable energy of no less than 2.4 kilowatts per square foot of conditioned floor area of the dwelling unit. So what I would suggest is that you take the conditioned floor of the dwelling unit and multiply it by 2.4, and that would be your minimum allowed for your review. And then they're supposed to put that on the construction documents. They should be doing that calculation on the construction documents.
Mike, does that answer your question?
No, I was asking I know what the ultimate number we're going to be looking for is. I'm asking how the designer would then calculate that and indicate that the system is meeting that. Is that going to require modeling on their part?
Well, the system size, the system size is the requirement. So they would size the system using that formula or make it bigger than. I believe maybe John has a comment as well.
This is Paul. I'll chime in. John wants to wait a second, but I would assume, Robbie, in this, that if someone is doing an energy rating, they would be able to determine this, like what the estimated kilowatt hours per year would be, and then size the solar PV system, not necessarily just using the rating software, but also using something like, NREL's sizing calculator or others to determine what that would be. But I would think there would need to be, or it'd be preferable that there be modeling done. Otherwise, you're using something like Xcel Energy's typical residential consumption levels or something like that to determine it. But was there an intent as this was crafted to have it be coming from modeling, or was it other things? Do we know? If someone can answer that.
I don't believe there's a requirement. I mean, I think the assumption was that it would be coming from modeling, but it doesn't specifically say that.
So I
Okay.
do want to,
This-
sorry, Kevin, can I answer that a little bit? I do want to clarify, in conversations with Sean previously, we discussed it's not about the size of the system, it's about the output. So I understand where Mike's question is coming from. I don't have the technical background to tell you exactly which equation we would need to calculate that. I imagine that could come from a policy clarification. I defer a little bit to Eric on that, but I think the intent isn't just to say this PV can do this. It's sized to that because there's so many, site constraints and considerations that need to be taken into effect. So again, I understand your question. Maybe Robbie, you can help answer it in that frame there, or maybe we defer to a policy clarification on that.
It might be a little difficult to do a policy because we're not familiar with that. We're not familiar with how to calculate the output. When we're doing PV systems and designing them, we're looking at the Kw on the AC side and the DC side. So this is a little bit outside of our area of expertise.
Okay, still a pending question out there. Some food for thought, I guess, for the rest of the committee members. But we'll move forward to the next question, which comes from Elizabeth.
Yeah, I was going to chime in on a couple of things, but I think I can also answer the sizing question. And I might suggest that we change this to be a little bit more residential code friendly, because everyone who said that you have to model this to get the kilowatt hours per year is correct. And I think that's going to be a little bit beyond the ability of the folks who are going to be using this bit of the code. Like, we can do it as commercial modelers, but not very many people that I know how to do that. So you have to go to NREL's website. You have to use this software called PV Watts. You have to basically model your roof and the slope and the specific panel by manufacturer. And it is a complex thing. Most suppliers for a residential panel are probably not going to even do that. They might have a rule of thumb. I would doubt that the size of this system is going to include the cost to model the system. So what I might suggest is to take the intent here, this 0.7 kilowatt hours per year, convert that using some real simple rules of thumb and translate into a physical area of roof that needs to be covered by array. And we could do that. We did that in the commercial code, that we can apply some of those same rules of thumb and just convert this so that no one has to do that calculation. The people who supply the panel don't have to do the calc. Building department, you guys don't have to verify that someone's gone to the effort of modeling. We could just sort of set some good standards that any solar manufacturer out there can meet without having to go to the extra effort, and hopefully simplify that. So we could probably do that here right now while we're talking and get you an easy conversion there that meets this intent. I did have a kind of a question about the intent though, and that was why I initially raised my hand about where the 2.4 Kbtu per square foot, or that 0.7 kilowatt hour per year of energy generation, if that's based on a certain percentage of energy offset, and what drove that decision because to me it seems really low. It's not even, if this is a 2,000 square foot home, that's not even a full kilowatt. So it's really small.
So I'll ask Courtney or Katrina if you have any background on that number from either the working group or from writing this up.
Yeah, I can answer that a bit. So that came from, that's the 10%. That's where that comes in. We heard from the previous committee discussion that 20% didn't sound like the right number. Bringing it back to the working group, that the 10% seemed achievable yet ambitious. I think based on Paul's comments earlier today, perhaps that's back open to discussion. But in the working group, that's where they felt most comfortable.
And Courtney, when you say 10%, do you mean 10% of the energy use?
Of the annual energy consumption.
Annual energy, okay.
So Courtney, just a quick follow-up. Do you know if that was using like Xcel Energy, typical home consumption, which I happened to look at earlier today, which they were saying for like a 2,000 to 2,200 square foot home is about 8,300 kilowatt hours per year. Do you know if that's where it was coming from, or what was used? Do you know what was used as the reference?
I don't specifically, but it looks like John may. His hands up.
Yeah, may I chime in? Is it appropriate time? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to chime in on this 0.7 kilowatt hour per square foot, and I'm coming from a commercial perspective. So I certainly don't have, at least off the top of my head, a perfect suggestion on how this could be adjusted. But to give you a ballpark idea, and these are ballpark numbers for a flat roof, you know, a kilowatt of panel is going to get you somewhere in the range of 1,500 to 1,800 kilowatt hours per year. So when you do the basic math, you know, at least ballpark, a system that size for 2,000 square foot house, I think you're getting just under 1 kilowatt of panel, which isn't very much. So, you know, my thought is in keeping a requirement fairly low on the required capacity, you know, you're getting people to do it with the understanding that a number of people, if they have to put on a 1 kilowatt system, they're not going to put on a 1 kilowatt system. They might put on a 2 or 4 kilowatt system. And I agree with Elizabeth and others' comments that, you know, this usually typically requires PV watts or a similar model to account for orientation. You know, if these are put on hip roofs with sloped surfaces and different orientations, it can be a little bit involved in the calculation to determine even an estimate of the energy use. And then you added things like shading from nearby structures or trees. So yeah, I guess I'm kind of seconding. I kind of agree with an approach of coming up with a simple sizing, whether it's a square foot of roof that has to have PV or a PV capacity per square foot to do something like that.
Thank you, John. Elizabeth, you're up next.
Yeah, I know when the green roof ordinance was converted to the green buildings ordinance, there was a similar discussion about, you know, trying to create that standard that was easy for people to meet. And that there is, I'll need to go look it up, but I'm pretty sure that the green buildings ordinance now has some standards. So like you know, green buildings ordinance says your solar needs to cover a certain physical area, and that the array or each panel needs to be rated to generate at least, I can't remember now if it's 1,300 or 1,400 kilowatt hours per kilowatt. So that's a pretty easy metric for people to document without having to do modeling. So I'd suggest that we apply that consistency that's, you know, it's already part of Denver policy in that particular ordinance, that if we apply it to this here and just use the same metrics across the board for consistency. And then it becomes a physical roof area and no one has to worry about modeling or trying to enforce that modeling.
Okay. Next question comes from Christy.
I was just going to chime in on green buildings ordinance. I would completely support aligning the two. GBO does not necessarily have exactly what you defined, Elizabeth. It does have an efficiency rating for the panel, and the requirement is the coverage of the roof. And we could mimic that. The efficiency rating in the GBO right now, we could talk about what efficiency rating we would want to put in there. In the GBO, it's it probably could use some updating. It's 16%, and I don't think we've seen a system that, you know, threatens to be below that in a long time. So, but I totally agree with the sentiment about being consistent and following a similar mindset.
Okay, great. Last call for questions from the committee. There'll be time for discussion after we go to the general public. Seeing none, oh, sorry, one more. Bill, go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to comment on that conversation about the kilowatt hours per year. I think that's a relatively easy calculation. I mean, we do it. I put solar in every house that I build. We do it on every house that we build, mainly because we're using some sort of leased financing, and that leased financing is based on a production guarantee. So we're calculating the production in kilowatt hours per year on every house. So I don't think that that's going to be a really big challenge for most of the residential industry. The other thing I was trying to think of from a builder's perspective on what's going to give us the greatest ability to meet the code. And there is a fair amount of variability in panel size and panel output. And so as long as we're using some sort of panel output, if we're going to do a square footage, as long as we're using some sort of low panel output, that gives us flexibility. Otherwise, you may be able to meet the code with less square footage with a higher output panel. And so I'm just trying to make sure that we maximize the ability to meet the code. One of the things that concerns me about solar in general is that there are a lot of people that have their hands in the design of the homes, from city councils to developer architectural control committees and stuff, and the roof form a lot of times is one of those things that everybody wants to put their fingerprint on. And not always are those people considering the solar orientation and the maximum solar capacity when they're looking at what they want the building to quote unquote look like from the street. And so I'm concerned about making sure that the builders have the maximum ability to comply with the code. And so I'm just trying to think and somebody can help me with this. I'm thinking using a kilowatt hour calculation might be better than a square footage calculation, because we have the ability to shift what panels we use on the homes to make sure that we're getting the maximum output from there. That makes sense?
Sure. So anybody want to chime in and try to help answer that question from Bill? Elizabeth, your hand's up next.
Yeah, only because I think it was pretty obvious that not even very many people on this call knew the answer to that question. I think that the ability of the community, the design community, and the people who are drawing out the roof are not going to know what to do there. You know, does anyone on this call know how much area a kilowatt of PV typically takes up on a roof? And here we have like the experts in the industry, right? So I think that there just needs to be a little bit more hand-holding in that respect. To answer that 2,000 square foot house needs roughly 1 kilowatt of PV, which is only going to take up about 80 square feet. So 80 square feet would be the answer. It's so much easier for people to design to allow for 80 square feet of PV than to know how to design to 0.7 kilowatt hours per year. And if that means that projects have to, some projects might have to put in a little bit more PV, 80 square feet of PV is just not much. I feel like a home can find space for that without having to, let me back up. So if you're putting on high efficiency panels, I doubt that people are going to put on one less panel just because there's economies of scale, right? Once you make that investment into the infrastructure of getting the solar up there, it just makes sense to do good design. So I think I would prefer to stick with that minimum square footage. If Denver wants to make a policy and let people do that calculation, but those people who are first drawing that roof will not have that information at hand.
Next up is Christy.
So I would add that in the case of the GBO, and my suggestion would be that we could apply this here too. We have the square footage requirement and we have the efficiency requirement. So the math can be done backwards, and we have worked with teams who have come in and said, we're going to do, like, we're looking at two-sided panels and we're looking at different technology. And we've said, show us the math for what the required coverage and efficiency would provide from an output standpoint, and then show us the math from your system, and then we'll allow a lower coverage. So I think we could do that here too, which would allow the savvier teams to work in that method instead, and to then not have to just be beholden to that coverage minimum.
Chuck K, you're up next.
Yeah, I do think PV watts is extremely easy to use. I don't think you have to be an engineer to use it. You can run it very, very quickly. It's free. You can run it on your laptop. I would think most people can run it. But having said that, I understand Elizabeth's concern. I would caution, though, if we come up with some kind of rule of thumb, I'd hate to see PV put on badly shaded roofs. And I'd hate to see PV placed on steep north-facing roofs, and I've seen some of that. And of course, the way to get around all of this is to do whatever we can to encourage electrification, which is what we really need. If people want to separately do PV, that's great. But the greater extent to which we encourage all electric buildings, the less we have to worry about how the PV is sized.
Courtney, go ahead.
Thanks, Kevin. I think this has been a really helpful conversation. And I just want to be mindful of time. I think we might still be in the question and answer section. And I would like to just hear what Paul's proposal is, so that maybe we can discuss that all at once, so that we're not discussing this and then moving to discussing, if that's okay.
Sure. So let me think how to do this. For the sake of following Robert's Rules of Order, we would want to wait until after we get rebuttals and then hear Paul's proposal. So if we get through this Q&A portion real quick, we'll go to any rebuttals from the community, and then we can bring up what Paul was wanting to propose. Carol, you're up next.
I just wanted to comment on what Chuck said. He said that the program that can be used to calculate this is readily available. I would say about 25 to 30% of the PV systems that we see submitted to the city of Denver are not from local people. They're companies with 2 and 3 people in it. They are not technically savvy or probably knowledgeable enough to be able to calculate this. I can see both sides of it. You don't want to limit the square footage on a roof or the orientation. But then again, if we don't hold our hand and simplify it, it's going to be a mess. So I'd say at least 25 to 30% will not be able to use the program or even know about it. And if they did, I can't promise you they'll be able to use it.
Mark, your hand's up.
Yeah, I guess as one of the solar experts in the group, I probably should chime in on this subject. So we have a lot of experience with minimum renewables in California, and there we're based on kilowatt hours or kilowatts per square foot. I'm trying to find language that we just approved at the international level. I believe we're following the same formula as well there. So it might behoove us to stay kind of aligned with what's happening in the international code, since it's the same subject. From my perspective on having done this before, typically my designer gets a HERS rating for their house that gives them kind of an energy index rating, and my PV system is sized based on that. And I can tell you from a contractor's perspective, it is not beneficial to me to put modules in heavily shaded areas or where obstructions diminish the production of my system. The whole idea of PV is that it's monetized on production. So the higher my production is, the more money as a contractor, as a leaseholder I get, or as my customer benefits from. So I know a lot of the language, even in California, talks about where to put the renewables to make sure they're within the best position, best placement. So we might want to talk about how these things are placed with minimum instructions between a certain area, which we kind of, it seems like that information has been omitted from this proposal. Sorry. But some of those exceptions definitely help ensure that the PV system is placed in the optimal location. Not in there. Thanks.
Hey, Mark, you faded
Okay.
out on that last comment if you want to repeat that, but anyway.
I was just saying about some of the exceptions or provisions, say in California Green Code and Cal Green, talk about where the array is located between azimuth, I think it's 90 and 2 or 310, I think is the azimuth they've used with minimal obstructions and shading. And there's an exception for like when your array is shaded to a certain level as an exception to the minimum renewables. We haven't really included any of that stuff in here. So although I usually am a proponent for renewables everywhere, there's some stuff that might make this difficult for builders to comply with. So I'm gonna make some notes about that. I'll try to find the language, the formula we're using to calculate size from the international level. I'll try to present that, maybe we can discuss that in a few minutes. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Mark. John, real quick, we're still on our Q&A, so we've actually gone quite a bit into discussion on this portion. So John, if you had something to answer on that as a subject matter expert, go ahead, and then we'll jump into rebuttals. John, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Yeah, Mark was essentially right for the residential side of the California regulations, that there's a kilowatt hour or kilowatts, so panel capacity requirement per square foot. And there's an exception that panels between 90 degrees and 300 are not considered. And there's another exception for snow loads. But I just want to reiterate that, this, at least as I see it, this requirement is pretty low. So I don't think many 2,000 square foot single family homes would put on just 1 kilowatt, as Elizabeth mentioned, was fairly easy to do with just roughly 80 square foot of panels when they could get better economies of scale with all the other system components, putting on at least 2 or 4 kilowatts to meet more of the load. So I guess just reiterate my opinion that it's kind of a way to encourage people to do significant amount of PV without putting onerous capacity requirements. So that's my basic comment. Thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, general public, we will go to you now for any rebuttals and support. If anybody from the general public wants to speak in support of the rebuttal, please raise your hand. Any rebuttals from the general public in support? Third and final call, any rebuttals in support from the general public? Seeing none, we didn't have anybody that spoke up in opposition, so there's no opportunity for rebuttals on that. So now we go back to the committee for our discussion period, or someone makes a motion, wants to make a motion. So just a reminder that we did have quite a few suggestions there. I would encourage you all to come up with some type of language. It sounds like there's a few of you that are interested in making some of these changes. So I would encourage you to propose that language. It sounds like you've already gotten some of your discussion out on the table there. First hand up for discussion is Mark.
Sorry, legacy hand.
Okay. Anybody else? Anybody want to make a motion? You can discuss or make a motion during this period.
I would like to make a motion to propose an amendment to this proposal.
Okay.
So with that, I can share a screen. Let's see if yeah, go ahead and let me allow to share a screen. I can show some changes to the language that have been drafted.
Paul, is this the one that you emailed? I can put it up on the screen side by side.
Okay.
Okay, I'll
Thank
put
you,
it
Kevin.
up there.
So, and while we, thank you, Kevin, that's great. So the amendment, as I was alluding to before, is I'm proposing, in discussion with other members of the committee, that we use this opportunity here on the last day of our committee meeting to at least strongly consider doing something to move us forward with having homes that would be, and this is due respect to what Robbie was saying about all electric homes being an exemption on there, but having this tie in between the amount of solar that we'd require on a home and some response to do all electric heating and all electric, so space and water heating. So we proposed right now using the sections of the code, the R408.8.2 and the other sections that reference high performance and premium space and water heating, that those would be an exception if you're doing that to allow you to actually have lower levels of solar PV. And if you are having, if you are still going ahead with installation of natural gas, space and water heating, that you'd have a higher level of solar PV that would be required on the building. So we've proposed, me mostly, but we're proposing as a starting point, if you're still staying with natural gas for space and water heating, you might have to go to something closer to 50%, using these numbers that the number that we had before. I hope my numbers are good with this, but basically we're trying to stay with that 10% level that was being proposed if you did electrify your home, and then going up to up above, thank you, Kevin, going up to a higher level, the 7.2 kW, 1,000 BTU per year or 2.1 kilowatt hour per year level. So it's basically saying if you don't want to electrify, you need to invest more money in solar. If you are going to electrify, have a more modest requirement for solar. Those are the key points of this. I'm happy to hear from Robbie again or others as to why this wouldn't be necessary, but to me it felt like we were missing an opportunity here where we'd be like, okay, we're going to do some requirements of some modest amount of solar, and yet we're going to say, oh, let's go another 20 years before we're saying you need to do something more to electrify the primary sources of on-site emissions, which are space and water heating in a residential space. So that's it in a nutshell, and I'm happy to take questions or comments from others.
Okay, so Paul has made a motion to modify, just so you have it. It's on the screen side by side. In red are his proposal, or sorry, his motion to modify. So there's a couple things I'll recap for you. The number of no less than changing from 2.4 Kbtu per year to 7.2, then changing the 0.7 kWh per year to 2.1, adding another exception, which is highlighted on the screen, and then in the second exception on the right-hand side, changing it from 9 additional credits to at least 13. So those are that is his motion to modify this. We would ask for if there's a second or any discussion on that. Eric, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. I'm just a little confused with respect to the way the language of exception number 2 has been rewritten. In particular, the 4 different sections that are listed in the first part of the sentence have ors and ands, which to me is not as clear as I think it needs to be. We have R408.8.2 or 408.8.3 and 408.10.2 or. So I think that needs a little clarification from a implementation perspective. I just needed to make that comment and ask that we get that clarified a little bit.
That's great stuff, Eric. I think it was me trying to throw it together a little too quickly, but the point was trying to encourage that people will be using either forms of the higher performance water heating and space heating equipment. So whatever best language would reflect that, I'm open to having that edited. So.
Mike, go ahead.
So I see you've increased the prescriptive points to avoid the renewables, but then we haven't modified the ERI or the performance path. So are we losing parity amongst paths if you don't use the renewables there?
Good question. I'm very familiar with the ERI path, and I felt like it was not going to be much of a loss there with how stringent the baseline ERI is already. And then, as far as the ASHRAE modeling scenario, of R405, one, it's extremely rarely used in residential, but two, again, I'm less knowledgeable with ASHRAE modeling, though I've done some of it and work with people that do it regularly. But I felt like that was still not getting too much out of alignment with that. The additional points were really coming because we want to make sure that people would be doing both space and water heating doing that points path, as opposed to not, is how I looked at the table, and making sure that they would do both of those. So.
Okay. And then I'll sneak in one more question while I still have my hand up here. It goes back to still the sizing requirements that will likely confuse residential applicants. Additionally, it's substantially larger than it was previously. So I guess my concern is, and this probably goes a lot to me not knowing a lot about PV systems, but what size is that going to take up on roofs? Like for a duplex, then they need to meet that requirement twice. Are we going to start looking at space situations that's going to make that prohibitive for them?
So, Elizabeth may be able to answer this, but I'll just throw it out that if we were assuming a 400 watt panel, which is fairly normal these days in the residential market, if you took up around 300 square feet, roughly, you could go as high as having a performance that's close to 6 kW, which would be more than 50% of the typical load for a home. It'd be 70, 80%. So if you're thinking of footprint, let's say it's a gable roof, 600 square foot footprint on a small 2-story house or something like that. If you're using up 300 square feet, so one side of that gable roof, assuming one of those sides would be south or east or west, in that type of scenario, you'd be able to, if you're using up 300 square feet of that area, you'd be in more than what you'd need. So that was the analysis that I did with some help from others to take a peek at that. That helps answer.
Next hand up is Elizabeth.
Yeah, I can chime in with some numbers to support that. So, going back to our 2,000 square foot home example, if we pretend that that's, say, a 3-story townhome to kind of limit the roof, and we're talking maybe 600-ish square foot roof, the solar requirement that's listed here would be about 3 kilowatts or about 240 square feet, which is 40% of the roof area. I mean, that only really aligns with the solar ready requirement. So I still feel like that's extremely achievable. If you go gas, yeah, you're going to have to plan your roof around your solar array to fit that on, but that's the intent. I feel like if this is going to be a gas property, they need to work a little harder to keep their gas rather than, 80 measly square feet of solar, which just feels too easy. That's too much of a, in my opinion. I think the commercial buildings are working really hard if they want to keep gas, and this in comparison is way too easy to keep gas on the project. So it's 40% of your roof area for, say, a 3-story type of product. I still feel like that's extremely achievable. To the question about R405 and exception number 4, I actually use that methodology a bunch, and I will tell you I've never had a project get 9% better using R405. So I don't think that exception will ever be used in either method, but I don't mind keeping it in there. I just don't think it'll ever happen.
Next hand is Courtney.
Thank you. Paul, I find this interesting that it allows a path for a residential building to still have their gas fireplace and cooking, which we've heard from the builders, but it then requires something more out of it than the all electric property. So I do like that middle ground threshold there. I do want to add to that. I think we need to add a few more points about the premium water heating here. You have
I would
R48.
welcome that, Courtney.
Yeah. I think Paul captured the high efficiency electric water heating, but not the premium efficiency. So Kevin, that would be R408, 10.4, and 10.5 as we're working to clean this up.
I think Courtney, sorry to barge in. I think
Go
when
ahead.
we looked at that under, like when we were evaluating the same thing for commercial, if a project met 10.4 or 10.5, it was by default already meeting 10.2 and 10.3. So I think it was just redundancy in there that it didn't need to be repeated just because you were already meeting it technically, right? If you're going beyond, you were already meeting the criteria below.
I get what you're saying, Elizabeth. I think though on the space heating, we're treating it, I'm trying to check.
Oh, okay. I could be wrong there.
We're treating it differently in space heating versus water heating. So whichever one, I just want to make sure we're consistent on that.
I see Kevin making those changes, so I appreciate that.
Okay, so sorry, hopefully maybe that clears up what Eric was asking, but Paul, read that over since you made the original motion. And I tried to capture what Courtney was asking about 10.4 and 10.5. We'll come back. Courtney, did you have anything else?
No, I'm also just trying to read it over. Thank you.
Okay. Meantime, for time's sake, we'll go to the next person while everybody reads that over. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, I think you're still looking for a second on Paul's motion, and I'm happy to second it with the understanding that these improvements that people suggested would be made.
Okay, so there's a motion and a second.
Thank you,
by
Chuck.
Paul, by Chuck. Okay. Anybody else, any other comments on this motion? Paul, before we call a vote, did that edit capture, or maybe I should ask Eric, the concern about the and ors by putting some either in there?
I don't think it quite has. We still have ors and ands and ors with what are we up to now? 6 different code sections. Yeah, I mean, from a user perspective, I really think we gotta clean that up. And whether we use, typically we don't use parentheses in code, but if we were to group them, because I think that we're looking at what is it, three sets of 2 or 2 sets of 3 in order to show compliance. But again, so sorry, just the way it is. It's I don't think it's very easy to understand and apply. I'm going back and forth and looking at what the right way could be to edit that, but I'm not ready to articulate it just yet.
Okay, we have some time here. We have a few more hands that are up. We'll go to them. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll full disclosure. I chatted with Paul about this morning, so I'm in support of this as well. I do like, and Paul, tell me if you think if adding a in the description of the Kbtu or kilowatt hour per year, we could also put a or square foot of solar array per square foot of conditioned floor area. Again, just kind of trying to make that easy for folks who are in the very early planning stages. and I'm forgetting who the solar person or the builder who spoke up and said, yeah, we do this all the time. That maybe if we have both, that can kind of help you both plan for it before you have someone like that on board, as well as take advantage of the documentation once you do. Can I have cake and eat it too, so to say?
I'd welcome those changes. The goal is to make it easy for, a sole proprietor custom home builder on to, someone like Thrive Homes who does this regularly. But yeah, it's meant to try and make it easier for people that this would be new to.
Okay, so I'll ask either Paul or Elizabeth, do you have language that you want to put in there then?
Yeah, give me one sec.
Yeah.
Okay, all right, we'll come back to you both. Chuck, go ahead.
Yeah, before we vote, I guess I would like to explain why I strongly support this. And I also did speak with Paul earlier about it. I thought the public comments from Maggie and Johnny made really, really good points. And what I like about this is it strongly encourages the all-electric exception, because I think we need to take every opportunity we can to encourage building electrification. Look, our grid's rapidly decarbonizing with low-cost solar and wind, and to take advantage of that, we need to electrify buildings and transportation. I just today got yet another air quality alert on my iPhone. And electrification will play a big role in reducing Denver's air pollution. We've now have really efficient home electric appliances like cold climate heat pumps, heat pump water heaters, induction stoves. And electrifying buildings also gives us the opportunity to include demand response measures, and those will support all this variable solar and wind that Excel is putting on the grid. So electrifying new buildings is going to avoid the cost of whole natural gas infrastructure in new buildings, and it avoids locking us in, as Maggie and Johnny pointed out, into decades of carbon emissions and air pollution. So anything we can do to support building electrification is a step in the right direction. If it was up to me, we would require new buildings to be electrified, but I think this is at least an important step that supports that.
Thank you, Chuck.
Okay. Elizabeth, I see your hand up.
Okay, I'm ready for my numbers. You guys ready? So
Okay.
these are my back of the envelope calcs that I use for commercial projects. And I've never had a solar array not be able to achieve this. For a target energy generation of roughly 1,400 kilowatt hours per kilowatt, and assuming that each kilowatt of PV takes up roughly 80 square feet of roof area. And again, that's not panel size, that's kilowatt size. That gets us to a number here that would be the equivalent of 0.12 square feet of solar panel per square foot of conditioned floor area. So it's 0.12.
And Elizabeth, just to clarify, that's getting at the number that I'd put in there of the 2.1 kilowatt hours.
That's
per
using
year.
the 2.1.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay.
So I used my 2,000 square foot home as an example there. So if I apply that, 2.1 kilowatt hours per year, that's 4,200 kilowatt hours per year. I divide that by 1,400, I get 3 kilowatts. I multiply that times 80 square feet, 240 square feet. Divide that again by my 2,000 square foot home, and I get 0.12 square feet of panel
Right.
per
conditioned
floor area.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's as someone pointed out, a probably not very good solar array, but acceptable. But that would, I think even, a solar array that sort of faces northish would probably achieve that, or is slightly shaded would probably achieve that. Now we could bump that up if, by a little bit more if folks have concerns, to be, really sure that it's meeting the intent here. But we haven't had issues with arrays achieving that performance.
Okay, Elizabeth, did I capture that right? We're going to cross out the kilowatt per hour in parentheses and add.
No, I would
0.12
still
okay.
keep it. I would keep that
Yeah.
kilowatt hours per year because that keeps the door open for those folks who do have the more efficient systems or come up with other solutions or can, you know, document it at the end. But to give somebody that per square foot early on, you know, in those early planning phases, and then the kilowatt hours per year, the Kbtus per year can then let you refine it once you're later in design.
So,
Okay, so I captured that.
Yeah, so I put an or in
Yeah.
there.
Okay,
Per
so
square
Paul,
foot of
since
panel.
this was your motion, are you okay with that?
that's a friendly amendment. Yep, that I accept.
Okay, and Chuck K, since you second, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I guess my one question was, I heard, you know, in California, they're putting an azimuth limitation and, you know, maybe we don't need that as long as we still have the kilowatt hours per year in there. Maybe that's covered and prevents you know, a very bad orientation or bad shading. So I don't know. I don't know if we need to put that constraint on it or not, to be honest.
I
Okay,
don't,
so
I don't think,
ahead, John.
I'm sorry, I don't think that constraint is probably necessary. I mean, if something is, it's unlikely they would orient them dead north. I would say, just suggest for the language, so for clarity, I think you want 0.12 square foot of panel per square foot of conditioned floor area. I think that's the intent.
Yes.
Okay, so
Thank you, John.
Chuck K, are you going to withdraw your second, or would you like to keep that?
You mean you want to, I guess I don't understand the question.
So the question is that there was an addition to the motion to add the highlighted section, or 0.12 square foot of panel. And since you were the second to the original motion, I just want to make sure that you're okay still seconding that. If not, that's fine. We can break that out separately.
I see. Yes, I'm fine. Thanks for asking.
Okay, good. Okay, Eric, maybe you got some language for us. Maybe not.
No, I'm back. I tried to figure it out, but I want to know from somebody which subsections are intended to go together here. I went in and dug through, and I'm not clear on what we're trying to achieve with the different groupings of subsections. So that needs to be figured out.
This won't help you find the sections of the code, Eric, but I'll just say the intent was we wanted to make sure that people would be choosing, of course, not electric resistance water heaters or electric resistance space heat, but going with the sections of the code that are talking about higher performance space heating that are electric equipment and higher performance water heating that are electric equipment. So,
right, but so for example, like 408, 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, and 10.5 are for high efficiency and premium efficiency electric water heating in conditioned and unconditioned spaces. You know, so what are we trying to, you know, combine here? I see it looks like Courtney threw something in the chat, so maybe that'll help. Yeah, I agree, Courtney. For our 408, 82, and 83 are together. That makes total sense. It's the other four that are kind of confusing for me, because you may have you know, high efficiency or premium efficiency water heating in a conditioned space. The other one could be not in conditioned space. So it's not clear to me how these are intended to be combined, if they're intended to be combined. It seems like they are.
I think,
go ahead, Courtney.
sorry, Paul, and you can correct me, but I think his intention is to combine all the rest of those four as one, because you're only going to be doing one of those things. You're either going to be doing high efficiency in conditioned and unconditioned, or premium conditioned or unconditioned. You're only going to be doing one of those four things.
Right. It was just, to leave as many options on the table as possible. I always hope people don't put water heating in unconditioned garages, but they sometimes do, and we're not trying to prohibit that, I guess.
Okay, so it is intentional to allow that then versus requiring the higher premium efficiency within the conditioned space. Okay, I just want to make sure that's the intent.
I'd prefer to not have it in the garages, to be very honest, but I thought it was in the code that that's already allowable, and I guess I wasn't trying to bite off that, bite that off and chew on it as well. So.
Still better than gas.
Say that again, Elizabeth?
Oh, sorry. Still better than gas,
Right.
in my opinion.
Right. I mean, I guess it's up
Okay,
to the
so I
builder
made
at
it
that
up.
point to risk it. It's like if they want to risk freezing or, something like that with the piping, then so be it. No.
All right, so I made an update to exception 6. Maybe it's a little bit more clear. I want to make sure that it still captures what you would like, Paul. It's you want one of the two sections, 8.2 or 8.3, right? And then one of the following 4 sections, 10.2 through 10.5. Did I capture that still?
That's a nicer way to summarize it. Yes, that reads, very well to me. So.
Okay, and still we can't, if it's still not quite clear, at least the intent is out there now, and we can vote and maybe change that if need be later on, just so it's more codified. I hate that word, but more written like code. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say we should add in the per square foot of panel in number 6 here,
right,
as well.
So
And is it 0.4 kilowatt hours per year? Per square foot?
0.7, I think.
For some reason, I was thinking it was 0.7.
I think that was a typo on my side. So if you change that, it was 0.7 originally.
Okay, then I think we can just scale by 1/3.
Right.
So it'll be 0.04 square foot of panel per square foot of conditioned floor area.
Did I capture that correctly, Elizabeth and Paul?
Yes.
Okay, and Chuck K, I want to make sure you're okay with that added language since you were a second to the original motion.
Yes, I'm fine.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? Okay, I will call a vote here just on these changes. But before we do, we need to go through roll call real quick. So I'll ask our note taker, Erica, to give us our voting numbers and see if anybody's filling in for anybody.
Yep, I'm at 20 committee members.
Okay, great. And is anybody filling in for a voting member that we aren't aware of? So if you're filling in, please raise your hand. I don't see anybody though.
Yeah, I don't
Okay.
believe so. I'm not sure if Jamie Bacchus is able to vote at the moment, so we might be down to 19.
Okay, it looks like he's maybe just joining and or switching to another platform, one of the two. Okay, so I will call a vote. There is currently a motion on the table, and I'll run through those to modify the proposal in R 404.4 from 2.4 Kbtu per year to 7.2 Kbtu per year, or sorry, if you want kWh, it's from 0.7 to 2.1 kWh per year, or 0.12 square foot of panel. In exception number 2, we're adding at least in there and 13 instead of 9 credits. And then we're adding exception 6 as it's written on the screen. So all those in favor of that motion, please raise your hand. All right, I have 10. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. I have 3. Go ahead and lower your hands. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I have 4. Go ahead and lower your hands. Okay, so it's a little different there. We had 17 voting members there, and of those 17, we've had 10 for, so that would mean that that motion does pass. All right, any other discussion, or does anybody want to make a motion moving forward on this proposal? Courtney, go ahead.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut Paul off. I make a motion to approve as amended.
I'll second that motion.
Okay. Okay, and there's a second by Paul. Elizabeth, go ahead.
I only just wanted to make sure that the people who voted against it had got a chance to voice opinions, and if there's any other changes that need to be implemented here, that gets heard.
Yeah.
Very well. Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, my concern here is kind of what I think Robbie brought up earlier, was about a shaded roof system. There's no exception here for, like, if I'm shaded by something other than the building itself. So you're in Denver, trees and mountains are a thing. And those can greatly affect solar access on a rooftop. So you could be putting, with this code, there's no exception for it, you could be putting modules in shade just because you have to comply with minimum renewables where they don't produce anything. So maybe I would add another exception, maybe based on language from the international code level, where it says something to the effect of, let's see. Here. Oh, a dwelling unit with solar ready zone area that is shaded for more than 70% of daylight hours annually. That's the language that's in the international code. But it does allow a builder to do a solar access report and figure out if it's cost effective to put panels in a certain location. If they're shaded most of the time, then it's not cost effective. So maybe I would make a motion to add an exception for shading. One of those exceptions. I'm sorry for all the kid noise behind me.
Okay, so Mark, if I hear that correctly, and this will have to go to Courtney and Paul, but his concern currently is that exception, there's not an exception for shading, and he would like to see some type of exception for shading. And I think if I heard that correctly, the international one might be like 70% of the time or something like that. Didn't quite catch all that, but that's his concern.
I've pasted the text from the 2024 IECC that first approved in the first draft in the chat.
Thank you, Mark. I think my concern there is having that as an exception. I think that should be more of a requirement if you're pursuing solar. Because if you're just the shaded building, then you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do efficiency or additional energy modeling or electrification. So I think maybe that can live in the R404.4, but not in the exceptions. Does that sound like your intent there?
Oh yes, because I wouldn't want to have to accept any of the other efficiency measures. You only want to not install the solar system that's going to be in the shade. So if it makes more sense to put this requirement in the body of our 404.4, then that would make sense to me.
Okay, then I would agree with that. Kevin, can we, and if Paul's okay with that as well, can we see that on the screen?
Sure, so we want to add a sentence at the end here. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's probably the right place.
I think the terminology solar ready zone probably has to be replaced with minimum renewable something array, some other language that talks about a system that would be installed with minimum renewable.
Okay, it's a little bit, you're a little bit choppy to hear, Mark. I don't know if there's a way you can chat that in the meantime, but we will try to get something in there. There is another hand up in the meantime, though, so we'll go to Elizabeth.
I was just going to say, since I happen to have my code book open, it's section, or I should say it's Appendix RB of the 2021 IECC. I think we can just pull language there, and maybe you can add a sentence that says something like, areas of the roof that are in full or partial shade for more than 70% of daylight hours may not be used to meet this requirement. And that's right out of solar ready zone requirements in section, excuse me, Appendix RB.
Okay, can you repeat that one more time? Areas of the roof, more
Areas
than
of the
70%
roof.
of daylight hours?
Yeah, areas of the roof that are in full or partial shade for more than 70% of daylight hours annually may not be used to meet this requirement. But so now let's read this. So to Mark's point, if you do have a building that is fully shaded and you cannot meet either R404.4 as written or say exception 6, that does now encourage or potentially require that project to pursue one of the other exceptions, 1, 2, 3, or 4. And that would be their only way to meet this requirement, but you still could meet this requirement. You would now just be, obligated to do one of those other options.
Gotcha, so there's a
So throw that out there for
technically,
consideration.
Right, okay. So while I type that on the screen, Courtney, are you okay with adding that sentence as part of your motion? So a motion to approve with the intent to modify that one section? Okay, I see yes. And Paul, are you okay with that since you were the second?
I'm okay with that. And I have a separate comment.
Okay, so now we got that taken care of, we can go ahead, Paul, and hear your comment.
So with a little help from a friend, I realized that I made an error in correcting exception 6, where we go from 1.2 Kbtu per year to 0.7 kilowatt hours per year. Following the same percentage drop from above, that number really needs to be 0.35. So I know we voted on that change, but that was too quick of a math change on my part, and I want to keep the logic the same. Otherwise, someone would be confused by that. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
That would take the per square foot from 0.04 to 0.02.
So it's very modest, tiny, anyway.
Okay, since that was just a scaling and that was made, the point was made during the discussion, we won't vote on that, and it didn't get any more stringent, so we will go ahead and keep that in there.
Thank you.
Okay, there is something for you all to consider on the table here. There is another sentence that has been added, which sounds like there is a repercussion potentially by adding that sentence. However, there is a motion to approve with the intent to modify just that one area. So if and when we do vote on this, it would be to approve both that additional sentence and the overall proposal. So keep that in mind when I call a vote here. Is there any further discussion before I call a vote? Second call for any further discussions, any concerns, questions. Everybody's clear on what you're voting on. If you're uncomfortable, that's okay. You can vote to abstain or no. That's fine, and we can continue the discussion. I will now call a vote. All those in favor of approving as amended with the intent to further modify, adding one section, areas of the roof that are in full or partial shade for more than 70% of daylight hours annually may not be used to meet this requirement. All those in favor, please raise your hand. I have another hand just went up. I have another hand just went up. 13, go ahead and lower your hands. All hands are down. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. I have 4. Okay, so this passes 13 to 0 to 4, and we are done with item number 67. I'll hit save on that, but with a quick time check, we are exactly halfway through. So let's take a 8-minute break, and we will come back and hit the commercial item number 6. Feel free to turn off your camera, and we'll see you in 8 minutes. Okay, if you can hear my voice, let's start making our way back. All right, so welcome back. We are now going to cover proposal number 6, which covers section C 406.1. Just as a reminder, we've heard this before. We've made some changes as a committee before. And then the last time we heard it on July 7th, it was voted to table this so a working group could get together and make further edits to that. So with that being said, Courtney, I don't know if you were part of that working group, if you want to give us a summary of those changes so the committee knows what was updated.
Thank you, Kevin. Can you please scroll down to the highlighted section in C406.12? So we'll be focusing today, so it's helpful to see it on the screen. Yeah, that looks good. Thanks. So as Kevin mentioned, we had, from the hearing on July 7th, we heard some feedback about the electrification credits. We met with a small working group and sorted through those concerns. And since this proposal was already heard a few times, I'll just go through those updates that were made since it was last heard on July 7th. The working group consisted of Elizabeth Gilmore, John Arndt, Sean at NBI, Mark Jelinski, and then we had a few email updates with people, Alan Young, Chuck Bartel, and Caitlin Anderson from ME Engineers to review it. So as a high-level reminder, this proposal calibrates the commercial prescriptive points path and provides project teams with flexibility on how to achieve the required credits. There are different required credits based on the occupancy type, as well as for all electric buildings. The committee working group met to refine the space heating electrification credit options you see. The credit option was split into 2 credit options: a base for credit or for space heating electrification, so C406.12, and an additional credit option for cold climate heat pumps, C406.13. The base credit, C406.12, only requires electric equipment for space heating and sets a cap for electric resistance heating. A new limit of 5 watts per square foot was added for VAV systems with electric resistance reheat, along with an exception added for supplementary heat in alignment with the requirements developed by the working group for electrification. The existing limit of 1.35 watts per square foot was still kept for all other systems. The prohibition of utilizing credit options for above code heating equipment was also removed, since this credit option is now limited to just electrification. C406.13, the cold climate heat pump credit option includes only the cold temperature COP performance requirements. Projects can get credit for all season efficiency from HSPF improvements from the existing C406.3 option. The credits from the original electrification measure were split between those 2 options. And there were also concerns from the last hearing about the consistency of providing information in the main C406.1 table. So the working group addressed the comments about clarifying these additional line items by just making their treatment consistent in the table. So the table footnote for greater than 15% lighting reduction, lighting power was replaced with an additional row with a reference to the section. So hopefully this helps to clarify and make that consistent. So I'm going to pass it to Katrina, and she'll go over the commercial graph that we saw for residential a few minutes ago. Thanks.
Katrina, you're on mute.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share the graph just showing your progress, since this is the last of the big high impact commercial proposals. Sean put this together even though he wasn't able to be with us today. So I think this tracking graph is familiar to you at this point. This has been updated to reflect the proposals that have been passed by the committee up until this point. It also includes the C406 proposal that you're considering right now. And you can see the progress on commercial has allowed the commercial code to just reach the trajectory line. And so you can see that current status dot. That is where you're at if you pass this C406 proposal. We made really good progress this code cycle. We, of course, didn't move all the way to the max potential line. And just to summarize some of the factors, things that you didn't move forward. Well, some of the mandatory electrification moved forward. It was less ambitious than the original electrification proposal. C406 wasn't quite as progressive. Minimum renewables didn't move forward. It just was an option in C406. Appendix G was a little less stringent than the other proposals, but still, you can see the dot is just on or almost on that dotted line. And I also just really want to say, because this is the last time I'll speak to you, and so I just want to give my heartfelt thanks to all of you for all the work that you have put in with us over all of these months and months of work to refine our next building code. It's not easy work, and we are so thankful to you for partnering with us and helping to move our city towards these climate goals and solutions.
Thank you both, Courtney and Katrina, for that. Let me put my screen back up. So if anybody wants to have a timer, they would have it. Okay, I will go to the general public. Anybody that wants to speak in support of this proposal, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Mark, go ahead and introduce yourself, and you'll have 2 minutes.
Hi, Mark Jelinski, RMH Group. I did serve on that working group, and I think we did a good job. I thank you, Katrina and Courtney, for inviting us all into that. I really don't have any too terrible things. I really like the way that it ended up. So the closer to the way that it ends up today would make me happy. I think we worked through a lot of those issues. I think I'm seeing a couple of typos that you guys will probably pick up anyway. Under C406.13, it's talking about 1.35 per square foot of conditioned floor area of the building for all other buildings. I think you mean all other areas. And under C406.16, HVAC system power, you say that it shall be comply with C406.15. Again, I think you mean C406.16. So again, all I got is typos. Good stuff. Good job, guys.
All right. Anybody else from the general public that wants to speak in support, please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll go to opposition. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition, please raise your hand. Anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition of this proposal, please raise your hand. Third and final call, anybody from the general public that wants to speak in opposition. Being none, I'll go to the committee. Committee, this is your time to ask questions. Elizabeth, go ahead.
Yeah, I may just not be seeing it because I'm kind of looking at a track changes version, but did we get in the freeze protection stuff that we talked about? Or does that not apply here? Is that ringing a bell? Folks who are in that working group?
Anybody want to chime in on Elizabeth's question?
Elizabeth, can you remind me of this exact conversation? I'm trying to pull.
Oh yeah, we had the discussion about the heated plenums. So like when we have a drop plenum, say in a parking garage for protection of plumbing equipment, and we talked about, well, does the plenum floor count as conditioned floor area? And that was all really kind of confusing and a little bit nebulous about how that applies to the code. And we were going to apply some exceptions for drop or heated plenum. And I can't remember now what the wording was, but I thought that fitted in here. that was fitting in here somewhere.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. Let me do some quick digging on that.
Elizabeth, I think that was section 403, not 406. That was the duct furnaces.
The duct furnaces?
Yeah, that was space heating equipment specific to warm air furnaces under 403, not the
Oh,
406.
you're right. You're right. You're right. Thanks, Ken. I apologize.
I had the same thought, so it's all right.
Mixing up credits now. It's all a blur.
Ken, you're up next.
I guess a question back to the group, and I wasn't able to make that breakout session. Did we vet out that exception number 1 under the cold climate heat pumps, specifically, you know, PTAX and other vertical heat pumps actually getting a COP of 1.5 at 5 degrees? Because I'm not aware of any packaged terminal equipment that are running down to 5 degrees at that COP level. I'm not sure if that was vetted out. I mean, for packaged, I'm usually seeing that closer to like 35 degrees.
Sure. So, Courtney, can you remind us who was all on that working group?
It was, and I think John might be able to answer that question. Elizabeth, John, Sean, Mark, Katrina, Tom, and myself. And I'm sorry if I'm missing anyone. I apologize.
Sure. John did raise his hand, so maybe John can speak to that.
Yeah, so I can give somewhat of an answer. So yeah, I mean, I think the general discussion was that with the PTAX, in general, there were fewer options for products that met those efficiency, the higher 1.75 COP, if at all tested at that lower outdoor condition of 5 degrees. With the NIA database, they do have a couple units. It's just one manufacturer, however, from ICER that have tested PTAX to a COP of 1.9 at 5 degrees Fahrenheit. But you know, granted, that's one manufacturer, but keep in mind it is an optional credit. So it is doable. It's probably not. There probably aren't a wide variety of products at that performance level.
Thanks for clarifying that, John. Thanks for pointing out the ICER product. Because it's optional, that makes sense. That you're kind of limiting the field, but because it's optional, I don't think that's too much onerous. Thank you.
All right. Next up is Katrina.
I was just going to echo that. What the working group talked about was how this is just an option, and there may be more of these products available in the future. And so while we wouldn't want to mandate something where there's just 1 or 2 products today, you know, by 2025 or 2026, they might be a lot more relevant.
Next up is Elizabeth.
Yeah, sorry, I may still be mixing up credits, but I really thought we put the heated plenum and some of the freeze protection language in something that had the same format. So even if it was in 403, I think it makes sense to align those two in the with regard to the drop plenums, and we also had the discussion about the freeze protection elements. I could have sworn it was 406, but maybe it was just 403. Courtney, does that ring a bell to you?
Guys, I'm also trying to pinpoint where that discussion.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I thought we had something there under space heating, but I'm not sure. I don't recall specific language, but it seems like there'd be an easy way to provide an exception for that. Or,
I'm looking back through emails now too.
I thought we discussed that there wasn't a need for that because of the way the credit was written. That
considered process heat.
I'm fairly certain we added it last week, or maybe it's the previous week. And I think, Elizabeth, you bring up a good point. I think we should roll it forward into this one as well. And that again was heat trace, freeze protection, and plenum heating. Kevin, I don't know if you have those track changes from the 403 conversation from Agenda 9.
Yeah, I'm looking through, as you guys are speaking, I'm looking through to pull those up, but I will have track changes. I just got to find the right one. So we'll work on that. But Elizabeth, did you have any other questions while a few of us are looking through?
No, sorry, that was it. Thank you.
Okay, Ken, your hand's up.
I'm good, sorry.
Okay, Alan, I see your hand up via the screen, but not necessarily, maybe you're waving at somebody. Okay, gotcha. Any other questions from the committee? We will still have a discussion period, but any other questions at this time? No, okay. I'll go to general public. Any rebuttals and support from the general public? Raise your hand. Anybody that wants to speak a rebuttal, please raise your hand. Mark, you will have 1 minute.
Yeah, hi there. I just, my recollection from the working group was that we came to the conclusion that that wouldn't be needed here. It's barely needed in the other one. Again, remember, this is for space heating, and freeze protection is, well, not space heating. And besides, what's the issue? Are you wanting to allow me to add more heat than that 5 watts a square foot? It's very minimal. It's needed for freeze protection. I'd recommend that, and besides that, heating the whole plenum thing is kind of a bad idea. That should eat into my 5 watts or 1.3 watts a square foot of conditioned area. Again, it's not even space heat. So if I put in a bunch of heat trace, you don't even have to look at this. It's not space heating, it's freeze protection. So it doesn't have anything to do with this section. I would avoid confusing the issue and just carry on with the words the way they are.
Thank you. Since Mark was the only one that spoke in support for, there is no other opportunity for anybody else for rebuttals. So we'll go back to the we'll go back to the committee for discussions or motions. Just as a note, I do have that track changes on section 403. If you all want to see that, just as a point of order here, I'll put it up on the screen so you can read that as we're going through the discussion or motion period. Elizabeth, you're up.
Yeah, I agree with you, Mark. I think when we went through the 403 here, we all agreed, that electric resistance here for freeze protection elements was, a little ambiguous because it's not really space heating equipment. But when we started talking about electric resistance for heated plenums, it led into that, and we decided, what the heck, let's just add it to be redundant anyways. So I'd encourage a little extra redundancy and have these 2 credits align anyways. And I'll disagree that the electric resistance in heated plenums is a waste because those will hardly ever turn on. They're really for freeze protection, but that plenum is a space as defined by the IECC. So that would contribute. So that would mean that any office building that's got a parking garage or multifamily or whatever, that has to drop that plenum and just do it's truly freeze protection. Those unit heaters are hardly ever going to turn on. But I don't think that building needs to be further limited in their ability to just say, do, all electric VAV with electric reheat, for example, because those heated plenums don't really have an energy impact. It's just a load that has to be designed and would be calculated as part of this load here, this load calc. So that was our logic in writing it here. But I think it makes sense to make them align just for matching purposes.
Okay, Elizabeth, did you want to make a motion to add some of that language into section C406, proposal number 6?
Oh, yes, please. If it works as an exception to 406.12. Sorry, I can't quite see them. Yeah, it makes sense to add those as the exceptions.
Okay, so Just so I have this correct, you wanted to add item number 3, 8, and 9 from this proposal to the current proposal under
No, not 3, because that refers
Okay.
to C407, so that wouldn't apply to 406. Just 8 and 9, I think.
And you wanted to make that exception 3 and 4?
Yes, please.
Okay.
And yeah, I know, Mark, you're right. The freeze protection is not really a space, but it's like we put the one for the heated plenums, and then it was sort of this natural question about like, wait a minute, does that mean I can't do heat trace or, whatever. So it just, yeah, a little redundancy there.
Ken, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's probably not necessary, but since we added to the last one, it just kind of keeps it consistent and clarifies it. Mark mentioned 2 typos in here, and Kevin, I don't know if you captured those. I want to say one of them had to do with the, let's see, was it there or was that part 8 that we need to know? I think that one stays areas of the building. And it's exception 8 that goes to areas.
I capture that, Ken.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay. So Elizabeth, are you okay adding that to your motion? Typos, fixing the typos.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and Kim, do I take that as a second for Elizabeth's motion?
Yes.
Okay, great. Any other discussion? Okay, I'll call a vote on those two, on that motion to modify. And the modification is in section C 406.12, adding exception 4 and exception 5, in addition to correcting those typos within that's 406.13 and 406.16. All those in favor of that modification, please raise your hand. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0. And all those abstaining, please raise your hand. 0. Okay. So those modifications pass. So that opens up an opportunity for more discussion or another motion. Courtney.
I make a motion to pass as amended.
Okay, there's a motion to approve as amended. Nate?
I'll second.
Okay, Nate seconds. Any other discussion? Elizabeth?
Yeah, I'll just say that I was the one who objected to the first version of this a whole bunch, and I'm really happy with where it landed. I think this is a really good step in the quest for electrification, gives people some more options to move into that realm of design. So thanks to everybody who dealt with me there.
Any other discussion before I call a vote? Okay, I'll call a vote. The motion on the table is to approve as amended, and there's a second. All those in favor, please raise your hand. Go ahead and lower your hands. All those opposed, please raise your hand. 0, and all those abstaining, please raise your hand. At 0. Okay, so that passes. I will save that, and that brings us to the end of our hearing today. I want to thank you all for, again, just reiterating everything that everybody's already said, for your time and your volunteerism on all this. It's great. This is exactly what the city and county of Denver is looking for. Don't be strangers. We all see each other's faces here virtually, but let's grab a bite to eat or something to drink and say hello. We're all part of this community together. So thanks again, and I'll turn it over to Eric.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. I really appreciate your time and commitment, as well as everyone else's. This has certainly been a very robust process, and truly appreciate everyone participating. I wanted just to give this committee an update to let you know that we will be working to draft the amendment language as the proposals have been voted upon, after which we will post the amendments online. That is intended to happen in approximately 1 month. And so you can certainly check back on the same websites that you found the agendas and meeting minutes and things like that towards the end of August. If you would like to do a review of the final language that we would be proposing to move forward to committee and council for adoption. So just giving folks an update on the timing of that. And of course, in the meantime, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, feel free to reach out to us here at the city, and we'll be more than happy to have a conversation about code. So again, thank you very much. That's all I have to say. And again, many thanks.
Go ahead, Christy.
Maybe a question for Eric. I thought we had received some feedback that we were going to perhaps address if we had the time at the end of this session, but I defer to you.
Sorry, trying to get the mute button off. Yeah, this was with respect to a particular proposal, just in general?
The electrification, and maybe Jamie can articulate it for us because he's here.
Yeah, I think it's fine, certainly to give Jamie the opportunity to speak if he would like to. Go right ahead, Jamie. And if not, that's okay too.
I believe Jamie had some technical difficulties with connecting his phone, so I'm not sure if he's on the line right now.
Well, if there are additional, again, questions or concerns that we feel like we need to address based on the code language proposals, there will be an opportunity for everyone to review those. And if necessary, depending on, I mean, obviously, if there's an error or something that was missed, an incorrect cross-reference, the idea is to make sure that we get those things, fixed and cleaned up so that they don't move forward inaccurately. So we will be going through that process as well.
I think actually this one had to do with how Energize Denver interacts with the electrification requirements. And I don't want to be the one who speaks to that necessarily, because I have not been part of those working group conversations, and I'm maybe a little bit more peripheral than others. But I think that there were responses from the CASR team, and so I would encourage Courtney or Katrina to speak to how Energize Denver will have adjustment opportunities for target values that I believe addressed the questions that were being asked in that email. And again, if we don't, if we want to get into it here, we can. If we don't want to, that's okay too. I kind of defer to others on that.
I think we can let the code committee go. Thank you all so much for your time. I know Jamie had some questions. We've followed up with him many times on his questions. So I think we can take that offline with Jamie if he still has them. He's not here to talk with, so.
Okay, well, I will stop the recording here. That'll be the end of the hearing, but feel free to stay on. I'll stay on like usual. Feel free to continue to chat more, good, bad, and different, about any current event or topic you want. So thanks everybody again.